Hey folks, it's Jordan, compassionate behaviorist, and I want to talk to you about one quick and weird trick. Just kidding, it's not that weird, but one quick way to, and simple, honestly, simple way to disrupt and dissolve power struggles. So when I say power struggles, I mean like a conversation where you're getting stuck with someone. Oftentimes it's parent and child. It might be romantic partners. Whatever the relationship is when you're in a power struggle. And especially when it's like you're going back and forth and trying to convince each other and it's not happening, you're just getting both more and more frustrated. So the basic concept is the idea of validation. Validation rather than problem solving, rather than advice, rather than like logically working through and trying to, let me describe this in a different way so you will finally agree with me. Validation is almost like a different paradigm. Validation is, we use this term in dialectical behavior therapy and in other areas, but validation here doesn't mean agreeing with or approving of what the other person is saying or doing or thinking or feeling. Validation is basically, it's like expressed empathy. It's like empathy verbalized, like helping, like coming from a place of, okay, that makes sense knowing this, or that makes sense coming from this place. So you might think of it as normalizing. You might think about it as expressing empathy about what the other person's saying without necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with it. It's a very, very powerful communication technique that has so many positive and healthy outcomes that come from it. One thing, we don't want to validate the invalid. So we don't want to normalize oppressive behavior or behavior that's really harmful to the other person or to us. We don't want to do that. And there's usually something we can validate, even when the thing that the person is saying we disagree with 100%. You can usually find the kernel of truth or a kernel of something to validate. So I'll use an example. So one time, so this isn't necessarily a power struggle, but in a way it is. One time I was meeting with a client years ago. This is before I had more DBT training. I had some DBT training, but I was getting stuck into this thing where this client would come in and say, you know, we had good rapport. We had been working together for a while. And this person was still really struggling with, certainly with self-worth, but also with a lot of problem behaviors and a lot of hopelessness. And this person was saying to me, no one cares about me, and kind of looking down. And I remember sitting there thinking, man, how many hours have I spent with this person? And in my head, I was actually offended when they said no one cares about me, because we had a relationship enough where I knew she knew I cared about her. And I, instead of validating, I like went into kind of almost reassuring, but reassuring almost in a, well, initially in a, hey, I care about you. You know, and then it was like her head went down lower. No one cares about me. And it was like, the more that happened, the more I was frustrated, and the more I was saying, hey, listen to me, I care about you, and like moving closer, and the more. So that was a kind of a power struggle, but one in which instead of validating what she was feeling, I was trying to solve this problem of no one cares about you by making sure I hammered in that she knows I do. And it just wasn't working. I was getting more and more frustrated, you know. And so validation, to validate something like no one cares about me, like I disagreed with it 100%. I knew not only myself, but many other people. I knew many other people that cared about this person. So how do you validate a statement that you disagree with even 100%? Well, one way to do that is to just be present there for it and hear it and be awake for it. Another way is to reflect it back. That could be as simple as parroting it. And a lot of people hate that. They think, or a lot of people, when they hear of this method, they're like, no way, I would hate that. But if you do it from a place that's really coming from your heart, people don't even notice that you're parroting it. But reflection doesn't have to be parroting. Parrot meaning saying exactly back the same thing, like no one cares about you. You know, it doesn't have to be that. It could be summarizing or reflecting it. So it might be like, I hear you saying this. I hear you that you feel like no one cares about you. You're not agreeing with it. You're not disagreeing with it. You're not approving it. You're not saying you like that thought or you dislike it. You're just kind of opening up space for that exists. That statement that you said and that sentiment exists here, and I'm going to just sit and hold it right here. That's what validation is. It doesn't mean you like it. It just means you're letting it kind of breathe. So that would be a form of reflecting it. You also could kind of guess the emotion and kind of mind read the emotion there. You could say, if someone, the person saying to me, no one cares about me, no one likes me, I could in my head think, what would that emotion feel like? And I mean, it doesn't have to be too much of a guess. I might say, it sounds like you're feeling really unloved, or sounds like you're feeling really unimportant or insignificant. Am I saying that the person should feel that way, or am I agreeing with them that no one loves them? No. Again, I'm making space for what I'm guessing the emotion to be. And if you validate based on the underlying emotion, then and you're wrong, the person typically isn't offended by that. Then they'll say, no, you're totally wrong. But they usually will correct you. They might say, it's not that I feel unimportant. It's more that I feel invisible. Like they'll come with the word. And that's really helpful. Because one, you're listening to them, so you're helping them kind of almost validate and uncover this pain that's there. And so validating based on underlying emotion, it sounds like you're feeling insignificant. They say, no, well, kind of, but even more, I feel invisible. You're like, okay, invisible. You feel invisible. So you're opening up the space. You can also validate based on past history. You say, based on what you've been through and the way that you've experienced some of these things in your past, some of these rejections from people who cared about you, I could see how you could feel that way. You could validate based on normal functioning. You could say, you know what? Sometimes I feel like people don't care about me, or when I'm experiencing this, sometimes I feel that way too, or a person would, a person might feel that way in this kind of situation, kind of normalizing it. And another type of validation would be to validate by being really authentic. What would a friend say? Not so much in the problem solving, but like something like, my heart breaks to hear you say that. And you might say, because I really care about you, and yet I know that isn't necessarily compelling to you right now, because what you're feeling is real and powerful and overwhelming. And it hurts to hear you say that, because I know it's real for you. So that's being authentic with your validation. So those are like 6 different, we call those 6 levels of validation in DBT. It doesn't mean one's better than the other. But here's how it works with busting up power struggles. Is when we're in a power struggle with someone, or just trying to convince based off of logic and reason, then it's like a debate almost. This other person's over here saying, I'm a bad person. We're like, no, you're not a bad person. You're great. You're amazing. And this person, meanwhile, they might actually not being comforted by that. They might feel like they don't know. If they only knew how bad I was. And so rather than a debate based on logic, we want to open up a dialogue between ourselves, internally with ourselves, like, what am I noticing come up for me as this person's saying this, and with the other person, that it's not about one answer is right. It's about, let me open up space for both of our perspectives to be here, and let me open up space to your perspective. It's like empathy doesn't mean you have to lose your own values or your own feelings or your own framework of who you are, and it means you're opening up to what is this other person's perspective, what is their experience. So validation is a powerful way to let go of power struggles and kind of dissolve them. And sometimes when people are doing that in a contentious situation, they're afraid, because they're like, well, now I'm going to turn into a doormat, and this person's just gonna, like, I'm basically agreeing with them. So that doesn't mean you're validating. It means you would be agreeing. So validating and doing it in one of those ways I'm talking about, you can add to that an and instead of a but, and then express either your own experience or express your limits. Limits are another word for boundaries. So it might be, I can hear you saying that no one loves you. It sounds like that would be really hard to experience, and I'm guessing you're feeling insignificant or invisible. That's validation. And I'm right here, and I notice as you say that I feel somewhat hurt because I've spent a lot of time developing a relationship with you, and I feel like you're not acknowledging that. So that both and is the kind of dialogue rather than debate. It's meaning the other person's experience is there and this is there too. If you say but, if you say, I know you're feeling that way, but here I am, I'm right here. Why don't you, then it's like the but cancels off that validation. It makes it so it doesn't really feel like the other person's being listened to. So validate and express your own limits. You don't have to add the and the limits. That can be especially helpful if you're someone who feels like you've been walked all over and you haven't been able to express your limits. You can just validate. A lot of times the other person that will be enough for them to kind of find that the conflict isn't between you and them or you and the outside world, that it's really their own inner ambivalence. In motivational interviewing, they call this rolling with resistance, where you actively listen to and reflect with empathy the thing that you're saying, even if it's an irrational thing or something that you feel is harmful to themselves. And in DBT, they call it validating the valid. So this has been, I'll do more videos on validation, especially if you want to, or if you have specific instances where you're like, how would I validate this kind of a thing from my kid or my spouse or whoever? How would I validate if they said, that I hate school and I'm not going to school anymore? How do you use validation there if you're like, no, you're going to school? How do you validate that? So we could go more into that in other videos. Well, I'll just give that one out. So there's many ways you could validate that. One, you could say, you could connect with the part of yourself that hated school, if there was a part of that. And you could ask yourself, what might be understandable that this person could hate about school, knowing what you know about the person that's saying that. And if they don't have a lot of friends, or if they struggle at school, or if it's just like they'd rather do their own thing with their time instead of have the school schedule, you could validate that, it's hard to, do things that other people want you to do all the time. It's hard to have other people want to structure your day. It makes sense you want to be independent. It makes sense that you want to stay home. I want to stay home too, or whatever it might be. And instead of saying, but you have to go to school, you say, and. It might seem like just a semantic thing, but really it's a paradigm shift from debate interaction to dialogue interaction. Instead of debate, instead of, but I'm the parent, you have to go to school, which that might work in the short term, but over time, you're just going to pass down more and more of this sense of like adults have arbitrary power over children, and adults, when you're an adult, then you can do this to your kids, which, that works to a sense, but it'll also inadvertently reinforce, it's not going to make the kid more excited about school. It's not going to help them feel more respected or more in charge of their life and their own decisions. And so if you instead say, I understand that you hate school, actually that makes sense. I didn't want to go to school when I was your age, and sometimes I even skipped school or whatever it was. And it's really important for me that you go. Maybe we can talk about later other options if that's something, or maybe you don't have other options, but the and part is going to be important. And I'm taking you to school. Let's do this. You can do it. I believe in you. Instead of, but you're going to school. Connecting validation and your limits with and is a critical step in kind of what Virginia Satir called congruent communication. It's a way to hold empathy and assertiveness together. Instead of, I'm going to be empathetic but also passive and not observe my limits, or I'm going to be assertive but to the aggressive point where I'm not acknowledging someone else's perspective or needs or wants. All right. Thanks for paying attention. Thanks for being here, and be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Be excellent to each other. Thanks. Bye.